Greetings and welcome to episode 105 of Bible 180. 180 episodes between Genesis and Revelation. Today we're at the beginning of Matthew chapter 25, verses 1 through 14. Jesus is nearing the end of his earthly ministry, and things become very important. Right before he dies, he has some amazing words in chapter 25 that we're going to take 2 episodes to look at. And as a way of getting into that, I want to quote a verse from John chapter 17, the high priestly prayer of Jesus. We'll be getting to the high priestly prayer in the rest of John in a number of episodes, but it's there that Jesus says, one of my favorite Bible verses, Jesus says, I glorified you on earth by finishing the work that you gave me to do. Jesus says to his disciples, I glorified you on earth by finishing the work that you gave me to do. The work that you gave me to do, the work that God gave Jesus to do is what Jesus did on earth. And by doing the work that God gave him, Jesus gave glory to God. Now, it's understandable that Jesus would pray such a thing. After all, he's Jesus and God gave him a work to do. And when Jesus did what God gave him to do, he glorified God on earth. It's understandable. It makes sense. But is it transferable? It's understandable, but is it transferable? God gave Jesus a work today. That's understandable. But is it transferable? Does God give us? Does God give you and me, normal, run-of-the-mill human beings, does God give us a work to do? Well, think about this. If you gave your spouse a birthday present, something you know that he or she really wants, and you search high and low for it and finally find it, you're excited about giving it to them, and then after all the candles are blown out, you give it to your spouse and she says, oh, thank you so much. I really wanted that. I appreciate it. And then puts it back in the box and puts it in the dresser drawer and never looks at it again. And again, eventually forgot that you gave it. They'd still have it, to be sure, but if it wasn't used with the intent in which it was given, would it be squandered away by being in that dresser drawer? I bring that up because in my many years as a pastor, I've sadly seen many times over the years people not doing the gifts that God gave them to use in ministry. All of us have been given gifts by God. Sometimes there are many, sometimes there are fewer, but God gives us spiritual gifts, at least other kind of gifts, and God wants us to use that for the benefit of others. When people don't do that, when they die with their music, their song, their gifts still within them, I call that the tragedy of an unopened gift. Now think about that. When you were born, you were given some physical gifts by God. God masterfully put together your body in such a way that your hearing, sight, smell, touch, all of that, God gave you physical gifts when you were born. God also gave you abilities, natural abilities, whether it be athletic abilities, conversational, relating, the gift of attitude, outlook on life, happiness, insights, all of those natural abilities that God gave you in this life to enjoy the life God gave you and to live it to the fullest. God has given us multiple gifts, and some that we use more than others. Some of them are talents that we have. That's our giftedness. And when we don't use that giftedness in enjoyment for ourselves and in service for others, it's like taking that gift that God has given us, wrapping it back up, putting it in a dresser drawer, and then leaving it there. And then what good does it do for you? And even worse, what good does it not do for those for whom that gift was intended, those who might enjoy that gift, those who might benefit from it? I ran across a quote several years ago that's always haunted me, a quote from Oliver Wendell Holmes, a former Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. And he said that most people die with their music still in them. Most people die with their music still in them. I think, as I said, I've seen that happen again and again, that people die with their music, with their gifts still in them. Because I believe that each one of us, deep within us, has seeds of accomplishing something great and significant for God. We all have written within our hearts our own music that's just looking for an opportunity to be set free. You have a responsibility or a calling to find out what that music is and to share it with the world, to share your music with the world, because your spiritual gifts, your passion, your abilities, your calling, your invitation from God is to do something with those gifts that you have been given, to do something awesome for God. Now, maybe you're at a point in life when you can only play one note on the music that God has given you. Maybe you're stressed out with the challenge of life and all you can do is manage a little squeak on a piccolo. But the calling and the invitation to use those gifts should not be wasted, nor should it allowed to be pass away when you do, only because you haven't played with the music that God has placed in your heart. It's like Irma Bombeck once said years ago, "When I stand before God at the end of time, I would hope that I would have not a single bit of talent left, and I could say, I used everything you gave me." Wouldn't you like to be able to stand before God at the end of time and say that? I gave everything I had for God. Because Jesus said, "I glorified you on earth by finishing the work that you gave me to do." The work that you gave me to do. Now, with that background, let's divert to the parable that Matthew tells in chapter 25. Matthew 25, Jesus talks about eternal consequences of heaven and hell. We'll talk a little bit more about that next week. At the next episode, at the beginning of 25, Jesus tells of a wealthy man going on a journey, and he calls together 3 servants and gave his entire property to them. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, to another 1. He went away, and the servant with 5 talents worked and invested and traded and earned 5 more. The one with 2 talents worked and invested in talent and worked with others and gained 2 more. They combined their gifts that the businessman had given them with good stewardship practices, and they doubled what they had been given. Now let's pause for that for a moment. Remember that at the time of Jesus, there were no corporations. Wealth was handled through just a few rich households. Family name, family farms, family business. Those were the corporations at the time of Jesus. And there were many times people living off them, but no stockholder meetings, no corporate boards, just the family business. And so the master gathers 3 of his employees and gives them an extraordinary gift. 1 talent is worth about 15 years of salary. So 5 talents were 90 years of salary. If you make $50,000 a year, that would be $4.5 million before taxes, okay? Second one was given 2 talents, and the third was given 1 talent. Even 1 talent, figure that's $750,000. I mean, we're talking big money to each one of them. Now, that might seem a little bit unfair or disturbing that he didn't give the servants the same amount. He gave 5, 2, and 1 according to their ability. The master knew his servants and gave 1 the amount that he thought that they could handle, and then he left. Perhaps it's a good insight to know that the master gave to their abilities and then left. Maybe that is the way that God works. God gives, and then God leaves it up to us to do with what God gave us. God opens the door to opportunities for us. God doesn't coerce, God leaves it in our hands to respond with what God has given. God gives us visions and dreams and allows us to just see a little bit of what might be, and then he waits for us to use what he's given and see whether we'll be faithful with it. Now, it may not have been equally given, but each of the servants received something, whether it was 4.5 million or 2.5 million or 750,000. They received varying amounts according to their individual abilities, just like you and me. They each were given something, and part of the reason, in a little rabbit trail here, part of the reason Jesus tells this parable is that we are those servants. Every single one of us has been given gifts of varying kinds according to our individual abilities, and the expectation is simply that we do something with them. And one of the life lessons we get from this text, since we are the servant, is that there's no such thing as a no-talent Christian. No such thing as a no-talent Christian. God has given you gifts and abilities and talents and experiences with the expectation that you're going to do something with it. You're going to use your gifts, talents, abilities, experience, and training to do something for God. So going back to the story, we learn that the master comes back to settle accounts. The one who's been given $4.5 million and used it and invested it and got another $4.5 million, 100% return. He gives back to the master $9 million. The one who had been given $2 million was given made $4 million. And the master says, "Well done, because of what you've done, I will bless you abundantly." Both those servants were good stewards of the gifts that they'd been given, and each was abundantly blessed. But the third servant comes back and said, "Here is what belongs to you. I didn't do anything with it. I kept it safe. I buried it in the ground. Here it is, the gift that you entrusted me with, untouched. You can have what you gave me back. I didn't do anything with it." Now, what does the master call him? He calls him wicked and lazy. And he sends them to the place where there was weeping and gnashing of teeth. The third servant had what I call the sin of unrealized potential, the sin of getting to the end of his time with unused gifts, unused potential, and wasted talents. And the king calls him wicked and lazy and sent him away. Some people die with their dreams still in them. In a very similar way, I believe that some people die with the gifts that God gave them still in themselves, still waiting to be utilized. So what do we do with this parable? What do we do with this parable? Of all the parables that Jesus told, this one is the most practical because it applies more to show us how we are to live our lives today and how God acts and reacts with us than many of the other parables. The most famous parable Jesus told was a parable of the prodigal son who goes to a far country, squanders his money, came to himself, went home, and found his father waiting for him. The most touching parable is a parable of the good shepherd with the lost sheep and how the good shepherd went out looking for the sheep that had gone astray, looking and climbing through thickets and jagged rocks, searching until finally he finds the one who had gone astray and he brings it home rejoicing. But this parable of the talents is one of the most practical one Jesus told because it tells us clearly what we need to do with the gifts and abilities and skills and experiences that God has given us. One of the most important things to remember in this parable is that there's no such thing as a no-talent Christian. No such thing as a no-talent Christian. I tend to believe that when we get to heaven, God's going to ask us two questions. I don't know this, but I tend to think. God is going to ask us one question. What did you do with Jesus, my son? What did you do with Jesus, my son? Second question I think he's going to ask is, what did you do with the gifts that I gave you? What did you do with the gifts that I gave you? Did you bury them and not touch them, not use them, not help others, not reach out? Did you bury the gifts, or did you use them up fully in service to others? Are you going to die with the music of your gifts still within you and have the tragedy of the unopened gift? Or are you going to live on uncharted waters, get out of the boat or walk on a boat, live into the gifts that God gave you to love, to give, to serve, to care for others with everything that you are and everything that you have? Because God's world is waiting to see what you're going to do with the gifts with which God has blessed you. Jesus' words, I glorified you on earth by finishing the work that you had to do, is very practical advice for us, so that when we get to heaven, with all of our gifts used up in love and service and caring for others, Jesus is going to say, well done, good and faithful servant, enter into the joy of your master. Wouldn't that be awesome? You take care. I look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Bye-bye.